Today I want to talk about why academic achievements and honors are important. And most of you probably know this is one of the most fundamental aspects of the application. And why is that? So primarily because we go to university to study, so academic excellence is the main things that admissions committees are evaluating, even though the US is promoting a holistic process. Arguably, the academic portion of your application is still the most important and will probably hold the most weight. Performing well in high school is a direct reflection, typically, of how you will perform in college. I hate to put it in quite tangible terms or make an education transactional, but to a lot of universities, students are investments. A university doesn't want to accept you if you're not going to try or to deliver in college. So if you work hard in high school and have the grades to reflect your hard work and academic capacity, then they know that most likely you will be successful at their institution and then successful later on in life, even after you graduate from the college that you're applying to. In addition to that, not just getting good grades, but a rigorous course load as well as high grades suggests that you'll be ready for the incredibly demanding nature of university academics, especially if you apply to a very academically rigorous program or university, for example, just like the Ivy League or perhaps, MIT, Caltech, anything like that. And also academics and recognition outside of formal classroom work. So, doing well in your bio class at school or having a good transcript, it's really beneficial to have academic recognition outside of that because that directly demonstrates your motivation and your nature as a self-starter. It speaks to the student's ambition as well as their intellectual curiosity. And colleges, they don't want a student who will only do well academically at their college. They want to make sure, because at the end of the day, a university is a community. And they want to make sure that the student isn't going to be, holed up in a library all the time. They want to make sure that you have the social capability to interact with a larger group of people and enhance the overall campus culture. It's really important to, do well in school, and that should be the priority, but also perhaps look for opportunities outside of your school, or maybe through your school or in your community, or if there's some national competitions, things like that, to just demonstrate your intellectual curiosity more to the admissions committee. So some academic achievements, this is kind of an umbrella term, and it can be broken down to these 5 main components that are reflections of your academic capacity that college admissions officers typically evaluate. So most importantly is probably grades, and that would entail your transcript and how you perform in school, basically. And this is most important probably because it's a reflection of you over a 4-year period. It speaks to your commitment to school, a prolonged commitment to school. And one thing that a lot of schools move away from, but it's still something helpful, that if your school does participate in class ranking, this can be very beneficial to you, because even though you have a 4.0 average, if they look at, it's important to see a student in the context of their school, right? Because the difficulty of academics and the course styles and the instruction styles at every single school are different. So just because a kid has a 4.0 at one school, but then a kid has perhaps like a 3.5 at another school, doesn't mean that the student with a 3.5 GPA is any less academically capable. You have to look at the surroundings and their academic environment. So class rank is a relatively good tool to kind of gauge the student or contextualize them in their community. So if you're first in your class, that's a testament to not only do you have a 4.0, but you're performing well or better than everyone else at your school. But perhaps being the best is defined differently at each school, and maybe a 3.5, just because that school is more academically rigorous, gets you valedictorian. Your school ranks, I know a lot of schools don't do this, but in your rank placed to your advantage, this might be something good to highlight or choose to emphasize if you are valedictorian or salutatorian, something along those lines. And typically class rank is something that's indicated on your transcript. So usually you don't have to make an emphasis of it. It's already known to the admissions committee. Another thing to consider, course load and standardized tests, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, and awards and honors. So I'll just dive a little bit deeper into grades quickly. And I had talked about this in a previous webinar about the transcript. Like I mentioned, this is the most important aspect of your application because, once again, you're going to university to entertain your academic curiosity. So academics are the priority. Like I mentioned, grades matter all 4 years. So it's really important to maintain and stick to the grind that entire time and put in 100% effort the entire 4-year period. Because they want to make sure that being committed for 4 years and having a good transcript reflects directly to how you will perform in the college environment. Because once again, college is also 4 years. So they want to make sure that you won't burn out and you'll be able to sustain that kind of motivation for a relatively long period of time. I had mentioned this in a previous webinar, but this is something important that a lot of students don't realize that they can do. But everyone has, perhaps bad moments or bad years. Maybe there's something going on at home, or there's a disaster or something in your community that impacted your grades. And perhaps there's an uncharacteristically low semester that you had where the GPA dipped below your average. There are opportunities to explain that inconsistency on your transcript. And on the Common App, I'm not sure if you guys have, the Common App hasn't opened yet, but once you start the Common App, at the end, there is an additional information section, and that's 650 words at your disposal for you to elaborate more on certain activities that you had done, or you could utilize that time to explain something on your transcript that could be potentially worrisome to the admissions committee. You could also ask, it's a very viable option to ask your school counselor to maybe add a note. I've had friends who've had some problems certain semesters because of something going on at home, and they've asked their school counselors to write a note explaining what had happened, or the situation, or the domestic circumstances behind that grade. Coming back to the class ranking, the college receives a school report so they can contextualize your transcript. And this is very important. The school report is one of the main things that they evaluate also. And it's because each student will perform differently, but that isn't a reflection of their academic capability. Because like I had mentioned, different academic environments are academically rigorous to different degrees. So the school report allows the college admissions committee to contextualize your education with regard to the people around you. Education isn't constant across all different circumstances, and especially internationally and different curriculums. It's really important for the school report. And this is where the class rank would kind of come into play. Another thing, colleges require you to send a final transcript after acceptance. So senioritis, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that concept, but losing motivation senior year is pretty typical. I just warn you against that because they do require a final transcript at the end of the year, and it is possible for them to take away your acceptance, or perhaps it is possible for them to rescind your acceptance, and that would be a very unfortunate scenario. So just remember to maintain that motivation all the way to the end. And another thing, and this comes back to contextualizing in the school report. So the school report's really important in the sense because they not only see your performance relative to your peers, but they also see the different courses offered at your high school. And from that, they can gauge how much you're challenging yourself. So if your school offers 10 APs, but you're only taking one, that could definitely make you look a little less academically motivated than, for example, if a student's at a school with only 5 APs, but they're taking all 5. That demonstrates a lot of academic motivation and intellectual curiosity and desire to challenge themselves. And there's often a question whether or not you should sacrifice your GPA potentially by enrolling in more rigorous courses. This kind of becomes a tricky topic in the sense that colleges do want to see you challenging yourself and taking the most difficult courses available to you, but good grades are also very important. In an ideal scenario, you would have both, But typically good grades in a slightly more difficult classes are preferred over perhaps perfect grades in easier classes. And that, once again, is a testament to your capability to adapt to a very demanding academic environment. But one thing to consider also is the impact this course will have on your other courses, as well as on your mental health. So let's, for example, there's a calculus class and you're not very strong in math. If enrolling in this calculus class is going to lower your grades in all of your other honors classes because maybe you're pulling all-nighters, you're investing all of your energy into this one class just to get, a B or a C, plus all your other grades are suffering, and your mental health and your physical health, perhaps it's time to reevaluate your own situation and say that this class might not be worth it, especially if you're not going into STEM. This also comes back to this last point about thinking about what you want to major in, as well as does your coursework reflect your interests. Taking rigorous courses that could potentially lower your overall GPA in subjects that you're not interested in might not be the best option. And this is all, you have to evaluate your own situation and decide ultimately what's best for you. But if I'm going into STEM and I'm not good in English, taking an advanced English composition course through dual enrollment with a local college and knowing that my grades will suffer and performing poorly might not be the best option for me, just because it doesn't align with my academic interests. And if I'm not thinking about pursuing English, it won't necessarily be a benefit to me. Maybe just the regular English class would be a better option. And this is something that you might want to consult with your school counselor with, and perhaps like your parents or just yourself, and think about your interests. On the other hand, if you're interested in physics and you don't enroll in any of the honors physics classes at your high school, that's also a red flag to admissions officers. For them, they're thinking, if the student's truly interested in physics, why aren't they challenging themselves in that subject matter? If we accept them into this major, and physics is a very demanding major, will they be able to handle the coursework because they didn't even put in that academic initiative in high school to challenge themselves? So that's something to consider. And if you don't know what you want to major in, that's kind of a different story. High school is also a time to explore a little bit and just know your limits, both in terms of your health as well as your academic capacity and what you know you can handle. It's kind of a balance between maximizing, challenging yourself, but not impacting your GPA or lowering it too significantly. And I know that's kind of a vague explanation, but it's definitely a case-by-case basis. So it's something that you should probably consult like a school counselor with in case you're having questions about that. And now we move to the infamous standardized testing. A lot of people think that the SAT and the ACT are the make or break it aspect of an application. But especially in the US, where it is a holistic aspect, the SAT isn't, most admissions officers say that it isn't the most important aspect of the application. I can attest to that by, for example, I'll give some examples of my friends. I know several people who got perfect scores on both the SAT and ACT, and out of all the schools they applied to, they only got into one. But then on the other hand, I have friends who got, maybe like a 13 something or a 1400, and they got into several schools that they wanted to. SATs and standardized testing are important, definitely, but don't let that aspect consume you. I think the GPA is, or your transcript, because it speaks to you 4 years rather than just one weekend morning when you were taking an exam, that holds a lot of weight, as well as other aspects of your application, like essays. It's just important to be well-rounded and to have both the quantitative and qualitative aspects of yourself at its best. The standardized testing, what's the point? It's primarily for admissions officers to gauge your academic performance with respect to your peers. As the name suggests, it's standardized, so it's quite easy to directly compare two students with their SAT scores. Even though there are different aspects at play, financial stability and things like that definitely come into play and influence an SAT score. For example, if you have the money or resources to take SAT prep classes, that definitely puts you on an advantage. And I think a lot of admissions officers know that, so they take the SAT score more or less with a grain of salt. But it's still important because, unfortunately, the truth, I've had friends, or I've talked to admissions officers, and a lot of them have actually mentioned that the SAT is kind of one of the first filters. So if you don't meet a certain baseline, it's hard to be considered. And that's not necessarily true, but I've heard people mention that that is what happens occasionally. So standardized testing is actually an opportunity as well as something, it's often viewed as something very negative, but to some people with GPAs that are lower than they would like, than they expected or wanted, it's actually an opportunity for you to demonstrate to the academic committee your academic aptitude and potential. For example, let's say your GPA is slightly lower than you would like. Getting a really high score in the SAT could demonstrate your ability to study, work under pressure, and perform well. It's an opportunity to help you if your GPA is slightly lower than you would like. There is some virtue in it in that sense. And what's also good about the SAT, it's in the US, we have a system where you can take it multiple times. And typically and most schools require you to send in all of your scores. And although you didn't do very well the first time, you shouldn't get discouraged because you have that opportunity to take it multiple times. Colleges like to see academic progress, and the SAT or standardized test is a perfect opportunity to illustrate that academic progress. Because let's say your first score wasn't where you wanted to be, but you studied hard, and the second time you did better, the third time you did even better. And there's this gradual upward trajectory of progress, which is really appealing and speaks to your motivation as a student. Look at standardized testing. Try not to be intimidated. It's also an opportunity for you if there are other aspects of your application that you think aren't as strong. It's an opportunity for you to compensate slightly. Another thing was awards. Awards come in many different shapes and sizes, and some basic categories would be school-based awards or local community ones. And that would be class ranking, like valedictorian, or perhaps your school has a local National Honor Society chapter. That's something you might want to mention. National awards, this is for the US, but we have a President's Award of Educational Excellence. I'm not sure if Kazakhstan has certain awards for academic achievement that you could possibly get and mention on your application. PSAT recognition is also something that a lot of people typically highlight because it is very selective. Or there's curriculum honors. I'm not sure if you guys are in IB or something else, but AP or IB honors, and also high placement in academic competition or contests. This last bullet speaks to, I had mentioned before, trying to show your academic engagement outside of the classroom, and this would be a really good opportunity to do so. If perhaps you're involved in, International Mathematical Olympiad or Google Science Fair, it shows that you on your own have the ambition without the pressure of a school institution to take initiative academically. It really speaks to a student's intellectual curiosity, and they're doing something because they want to and because they truly want to learn rather than doing it just to get good grades. So this is really a testament to your character, this last point. If there are things that you're interested in, it's really good to highlight those. Don't think that just because it's not school affiliated that it doesn't matter. Sometimes they speak even more, those aspects where they demonstrate that you're motivated. There are many, as I mentioned, awards come in many different shapes and sizes. When it comes to your application time, it becomes very difficult to determine what should I include and what should I not. Admissions committees are bombarded with thousands of applications every year. An Ivy League school gets close to 40,000, and each admissions officer has to read several thousand. And at that point, it's a lot to read and a lot of students to evaluate. So you don't want to throw every single thing that you've ever done at the admissions officer. you kind of want to be very particular and intentional about what you choose to include on your application. Some things to consider in evaluating your academic achievements and determining what should I include or what should I leave out. How do I portray myself in the best possible light? Or how do I curate my academic achievements to align with a certain narrative? There's 4 primary things that you might want to consider when you decide whether or not you want to include a certain academic achievement that you have. So one thing to consider, if it's highly selective, if it emphasizes your academic strengths and interests, if it's unique, or if it illustrates your leadership skills or academic potential. So what exactly does that mean? If it's highly selective, I'm sure you guys know that it's very important to highlight the selectivity of an award. For example, the National Merit Scholarship, and that's if you have one of the highest PSAT scores in the US. That's an incredibly selective award, and these competitive awards help the admissions officer contextualize your ability with respect to others. So once again, it offers a very easy comparison. To put it bluntly, highly selective awards are very impressive if you are able to attain one of them. You worked hard and you competed with a lot of people to get it. If it's highly selective, you probably want to mention that. Another thing, if it's relevant to your academic interests, as you maybe deduced, this is kind of a motif throughout the application process, this whole tying it to your academic interests. Once again, a college is investing in a student. And if they see that you're truly passionate about an area of study, that's very appealing for them as investors. I'd mentioned with your transcript, taking courses that are aligned with your academic interests. If you want to be a physics major, it's important to take a lot of physics courses in high school to show that you're not only interested, but that interest isn't misguided or empty, that there's actually an academic foundation and tangible results, that you're not only interested, but you're good at it, and that you're able to perform at a certain level with that subject. In school, there's that opportunity through your coursework to demonstrate your academic interests, but opportunities and awards outside of the classroom are another great way to supplement your academic success at school. So relevant to your academic interests, they're typically subject or field specific. They illustrate your commitment to a particular course of study. And if you do well, it portrays you as one of the most promising students in that field. This would be, for example, if you're really interested in classics and you win, a Latin writing contest, or you take the Latin national exam and you get a perfect score. See, that's something to highlight. And especially if you are declaring a classics major, or that's what you apply to school trying to be. Or, if you're going to engineering and you won the Google Science Fair, that's a very big accomplishment. That's not only highly selective, but it also aligns and it shows that you can apply your engineering or that kind of quantitative logical thinking outside of the classroom to a creative pursuit on your own. Things that are academically relevant to your interests are really important to highlight if you have something like that. Another thing, if it's unique, and this sounds kind of vague, unique awards or awards that are a little obscure, very unique to your area, can be very interesting for the academic community because it highlights something surprising or interesting about you. Admissions officers get thousands of applications with students that have perfect scores, 4.0 GPA or higher, all of the academic achievements, and they're perfect on paper. But at the end of the day, college admissions officers are building a campus community. So they want to make sure that the student is more than just their grades. They're definitely quantifying students, but they still want something humane about them to supplement that. And a unique award is a perfect opportunity to subtly show to the admissions officers that, you're, at the end of the day, you're also just a teenager with interests, and this is something that you're passionate about, and you want to take that passion and bring it to their school. Like I mentioned, it's typically aligned with your interests, and because it's unique or maybe that they've never heard of it, it'll catch their eye and it helps you stand out. If you're a National Merit Scholar, that's really impressive, and it definitely speaks to your academic commitment. But if you win something unique, or if you get recognized for something a little less known or something obscure or very niche, that's also, I feel, could definitely catch an admissions officer's attention. And it helps construct your narrative as a person. Another thing is if it highlights your leadership skills, and this is incredibly important, being able to communicate, because leadership is pretty synonymous with communication, and communication is arguably one of the most important things we do. Leadership skills or awards that are aligned with that typically involve the coordination and collaboration of several people. It's really beneficial when you're describing these awards to explain the role you had and the specific impact of your decision making. And that's the thing that I want to just reemphasize with a lot of these awards, especially if they're less well known. Like National Merit Scholar, you don't really have to elaborate on that because it is really well known, and the admissions committee most likely is familiar with what that means. But something unique or school specific or something that highlights your leadership skills, you might want to elaborate on that and give them more context to what it is, especially if it's something school or community based. So, and once again, for the leadership skills, they want to make sure that you're not just intelligent, but you're able to interact with a lot of people. Because when you enter a campus community, you're not living in isolation. You have entered a larger social body, and you have to be able to collaborate with peers and really contribute to that community. They don't want, every student to be independent and not engaging with their surroundings. They want a very cohesive student body. Awards that illustrate your ability to communicate and your leadership skills are a perfect example to show that to the admissions officers, that you are capable of that. With these awards, there are two main things with academic achievements in general, there are two main things that you can kind of reduce it down to, and it's engagement and impact. And that's something to consider whether you're explaining a certain academic pursuit or deciding what to include and what not to include. But they want to see how you're engaging with the community or how you're engaging with a certain subject matter, but also the impact. And that's why you can go back to the other side, but with the leadership skills, explain what role you played, explain how you engaged, and then what impacts your decision making had. Maybe, I led some sort of group to do something, and when I did this, we won this. So it's very important to produce tangible results sometimes, to just really contextualize it, take it away from the abstract, so an admissions officer or committee can really understand how the skills that you have, see them in execution. So that's really important. And one of the more soft aspects of just academic achievement is the impact recognition has on us and just our personal motivation. So if you get recognized, and this is why academic achievements usually are important, and a lot of people who have higher grades typically have a higher median salary after graduation. It's just because being recognized typically, to put it bluntly, it makes us feel good, right? And from there, we raise the expectations for ourselves, and we start pushing ourselves harder and harder, and we increase the expectations and for ourselves and what exactly our potential is. And after being recognized or starting to achieve more, especially academically, you start to realize your own potential, and you don't settle for mediocrity or things like that. You start to push yourself and wanting more, desiring more. And colleges know that. Just to come back to this point, the very transactional point that we are investments a lot of times to colleges. A student's an investment. After they graduate, schools a lot of it is a notoriety thing. If a student graduates and they're successful, a college has another successful alum to add to the list. It makes the college look good. If you're successful, perhaps you'll donate later on and increase their endowment, things like that. They want to make sure that you're enhancing their college community as well as you're on a track to future success. And academic recognition and academic achievements are one of the main indicators of that. So it's something that I'm sure you guys all knew, but it's something that you shouldn't forget, that academic achievements are paramount. And they don't stop in high school, especially if you're pursuing grad school or perhaps on a pre-med or pre-law track. But once you get to college, a lot of people, or a lot of students, and I think I was guilty of this as well, we see college admissions as the end of it. Once we get accepted, it's like, oh, we're free, we're done, we don't have to work this hard anymore. But quite honestly, it's just beginning. Once you get to college, and this is why they want to make sure that you have that academic foundation and academic motivation, because once you get to college, it doesn't end, and it typically gets harder. Your course load's harder, it's more rigorous, you're taking more classes, and a lot of it comes down to time management because you are more independent on a college campus. That's just something to consider, that even after you get accepted, you have to maintain that kind of academic performance through college as well. If our award's not that paramount, should we mention them in the application? You want to make sure that it's helping you, or you don't want to be redundant as well. Everything on your application should be revealing something new or portraying yourself in the best light. So I know people who have included things that, perhaps, not everyone's a National Merit Scholar, but that doesn't mean that you can't write other things on your application in terms of achievements. You don't have to win the Google Science Fair to write something down. You can write other things. A lot of it comes down to how you explain it also. And my friend who's also at Columbia, he had a skill in making anything sound really good, quite honestly. And it all depends on how you portray something. And at the end of the day, you did win this award, and there was some sort of effort put in on your end. So it's just important to highlight those things. Highlight the time commitment you put, or maybe the types of skills that you needed to accomplish this. So, it's definitely something that you evaluate case by case, or maybe you want to consult with a school counselor about what to include, but don't feel like you need to be a National Merit Scholar to include something. You can have local or school-based awards and include them. And just because they're less well known, that description part of the application it becomes really useful, because you can explain it and explain it's up to you to validate your own awards. So the admissions officers can't tell you that wasn't worth putting down. It's up to you to really portray it and to make a case for why this award is impressive, or why this award speaks to your capacity as a student. For example, I have achievements in extracurriculars. Can I mention them like honors? Or honors should only be with an academic achievement. So I had read some things about how you structure the application. And in terms of extracurricular achievements, you actually typically put them in the extracurricular section. So on the Common App, for each extracurricular activity, in addition to stating the time investment that you have put in and the position you hold, there's also a description section to write what kind of achievements you won. So, for example, I wrote Taekwondo as one of my activities, and I was like a national champion for Taekwondo. I wouldn't put that in the academic award section, or at least in my case, I put that underneath my extracurricular and wrote, Taekwondo, and then elaborated further, national champion, etc., something like that. But I think it kind of depends also, so maybe that's something you might want to consult with your counselor, just to be sure. I don't want to tell you guys something very definite. Is 4.3 okay GPA for Ivy level universities? So a 4.3 is above a 4.0, so it's quite good. Yeah, definitely, I think so. The problem is, so just because you have a 4.3 doesn't mean you'll get in, but just because you have a 3.5 doesn't mean you won't get in. And that's kind of the tricky part about the American education system, is that it is a holistic process. Just because you have, a 4.3 doesn't mean you'll automatically get in, and vice versa. If your GPA is a little lower, really focus on other aspects of your application as well. Oh, 4.3 out of 5. I mean, so with these very specific numerical questions, what I can advise is that College Board, they have a software where you input your SAT scores and you input your GPA, and it creates a chart of all of the schools that are in your range. And that might be a more helpful resource to you than me kind of explaining your statistical probability of getting in. It can be helpful to just gauge which schools are realistic, but just remember, top schools are reach schools for everybody, regardless of your GPA or your SAT score. It's nice to see realistically what your options are, just in terms of numbers, and that just statistically this is where you might fall.
And I want to ask you, is it important to have volunteering work in your extracurricular activities?
I mean, most students have volunteer work, and that really demonstrates your involvement in the community. So I would say it's relatively important, but also I've heard, so some people, they'll go on like volunteer excursions to Africa or South America and do like a month-long volunteer excursion where they pay and they go abroad to volunteer. And a lot of people write about those experiences in their college application essay. And I can't necessarily say how the admissions officers take to that, but I've often heard them dissuading from writing about that specifically, just because it sounds kind of cliche. But volunteer work, especially if it's your own project, is really a testament to your involvement in the community. So if you did start, if you volunteer locally, at an SAT prep center, if you just volunteer, at a local dog shelter, and that's something that's important to you, sure, put that down. That shows your involvement and engagement in the community. So.